Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get started here shortly. We're going to give it just a minute for people to get logged in, and then we will start our presentation. Welcome to those that are just joining. We're allowing a minute here for people's audio to get caught up, and we will get started. All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Whitney Sani. I'm a citizen of Cherokee Nation and the Communications Manager for the Native American Agriculture Fund. We are grateful for your time today and thank you for joining us for a review of the NAAF request for applications. Before we start our presentation today, I would like to review a few housekeeping items. First, we will have a dedicated live question and answer session at the end of this presentation. We have members of our team monitoring the questions box as they come through the Zoom chat and question and answer function. To ensure we are able to communicate all information and make this accessible to those joining in by phone today, we will read through all presentation slides. And in addition, the webinar will be recorded and posted to the NAAF website and NAAF YouTube channel, along with an option to download the PowerPoint presentation slides for later reference. Today's presentation will be led by two members of our team, Tony Stanger-McLaughlin, CEO of NAAF, and Belton Moore, Associate Program Officer. Our question and answer session will be led by Graham Gaither, Grants Manager. Just as a reminder, please submit your questions. Feel free to submit as we go through the presentation, but we will answer after the actual PowerPoint is concluded. And with that, we will go ahead and begin the presentation.
As Whitney said, I'm Belton Moore. I'm an Associate Program Officer with NAAF. I'm also a member of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. We're excited for you to join our webinar today to learn about the 2022 Request for Applications process. I'll now turn it over to our CEO, Tony Stanger-McLaughlin, to start off our webinar.
Thank you, Belton and Whitney, and thank you all for joining us today for our first webinar of our series of webinars that we launch every year during our Request for Applications. The Native American Agriculture Fund is a private charitable trust, and we were created in 2018 via the Keepseville-Vilsack settlement. The settlement alleged discriminatory lending practices by the United States Department of Agriculture, and the original claimants and their class were formed through claiming violations of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, the ECOA. The leftover funding that created NAAF expires in 2038. We have 20 years to spend down the funds. Each year we will do a granting cycle. This is our fourth granting cycle. Prior to NAAF's establishment, there was additional funding that went out that was part of the original Cypre agreement, and that was called Fast Track. The Fast Track funding, again, was provided prior to NAAF's inception, but you might see some of the original Fast Track grantees have been NAAF grantees as well, but the Fast Track grants that went out have all been distributed, and you can read about them and the work that they did and will continue to do with the Fast Track funding on our website. We have had funding cycles in 2019, 2020, and 2021. We're entering our 2022 funding cycle, and NAAF looks forward to returning applications and new applications. The mission of NAAF, what is per our trust agreement, and our trust agreement was agreed upon by the courts, the original claimants, both the Department of Justice and the Department of Agriculture. The trust is our guiding document. This is what we have to abide by through NAAF's existence. And the mission in the trust agreement states that we must provide business assistance, agricultural education, technical support, and advocacy services to Native American farmers and ranchers to support and promote their continued engagement in agriculture. You can see on our website and here today some of our grantees. We are trying to fund in as many states as we can, and we would like our geographical footprint to expand each year. But again, we know that a great number of our applicants are going to exist where any country is and where reservations exist. You can see that we have a pretty good stretch across the United States. And all of this information, again, is located on our website. You can look at our former reports and find out what we funded and which each of those little pins represent. They represent various entities and projects, and each year those projects change. So even if we have funded an entity once, the project the second year could be different. So again, I encourage you to visit our website to learn more about where we funded in the past. The 2022 RFA overview. Our eligible entities, again, are included in our trust agreement, but those are 501c3 organizations, educational organizations, including elementary, all the way through college, community development financial institutions, also known as CDFIs, tribes and their instrumentalities, including state recognized tribes. Important information for fiscal sponsors. NAAF allows fiscal sponsors. A fiscal sponsor is an entity that will apply on behalf of another entity that is not yet a fully established 501c3. In this instance, NAAF encourages startup nonprofit organizations that have applied for their 501c3 status from the IRS, but have not yet received a favorable determination to apply through a fiscal sponsor who can also provide important technical support for proposed project activities. If fiscal sponsors are used, this fiscal sponsor must be an eligible 501c3 organization and should follow the guidance in NAAF's fiscal sponsor information, which you can find within our application. You can also find it on our website where we have a Word document that represents the questions that we ask within the application. If you have any additional requests for information on being a fiscal sponsor or using a fiscal sponsor, you can email us, and our contact information is at the end of this presentation. All right, Belton, I'll hand it over to you for this slide.
Thank you, Tony. So you'll find on our website the copy of the 2022 Request for Applications Overview. So here are just a few of the things that are included in that document. We begin with allowable use of funds, essentially what you can apply for a grant from NAAF for. Addressing access to capital, this is really key, and we'll touch on this later in this webinar. Cost sharing or matching funds, collaborations, cooperators, and leveraging, limitation on direct costs, eligibility of previous grantees, unallowable use of funds, and the initial review on eligibility. And again, you'll find all of this information in the RFA on our website.
Access to capital. Again, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, the foundation of this case was based on the lack of access to capital and credit servicing to Native American farmers and ranchers. Access to capital, therefore, is a foundational principle in the work that NAAF will do, what we've done in the past and what we will continue to do in the future. Access to capital can mean a number of things, and it's very broad. Access to capital was, again, the core of the KeySaco case. Applications that don't address access to capital will not be funded in 2022. Please see our video on our website concerning access to capital, where we will explain in depth the reason why we have to adhere to including access to capital in the work that we do, but also some examples of how others have been able to include access to capital in their applications. Again, it's very broad, and this includes projects from elementary school, direct farm operations, tribal applications and their projects. And we have our video, but we also have in our Q&A some questions. And again, go back to our website and look at what we funded in the past, and you'll see that in every application and a lot of those projects, they are able to interweave access to capital in the work that they do. And when we say access to capital, it's very broad. We can be talking about credit education, but we could also, the CDFIs that we work with, they do direct lending. And so think very broadly about how you can include that in your application. But a word of caution, if you say, and you click the box, because that's a question where you have to check yes or no, if you're going to provide access to capital and you will not be able to go any further if you don't check yes on that application question, you also have to include it in other parts of your application. You can't simply check that box. You need to see it in your application. We need to see it in your budget documents. We also need to see it in your project goals and deliverables. So make sure if you check that box, you also include it somewhere else within the application. All right, Belton, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Tony. So our first organization that we will, first eligible entity type that we will discuss today are 501c3 nonprofits. So the general focus area for these 501c3s are business assistance, agriculture education, technical support, and/or advocacy services. And then we also have special focus areas, and the ones that 501c3s are eligible to apply for are beginning farmer and rancher, climate resilience, conservation, and disaster assistance. This year we have an available pool of $2 million, and for the general focus, the minimum request is $150,000 and the maximum request is $200,000. There are different mins and maxes for the special focus, and we will review those later on in this webinar. So the second type are educational organizations. Again, they have the same general focus areas as the 501c3s, business assistance, agricultural education, technical support, and advocacy services. And then special focus areas for educational organizations are beginning farmer and rancher, climate resilience, conservation, and disaster assistance, and communal land acquisition for tribal colleges and universities, or TCUs only. This also has an available pool of $2 million with a minimum request of $150,000 for the general focus and maximum request of $200,000 for the general focus. For a few reminders for our educational organizations, we have a really broad definition of educational organizations, as Tony mentioned earlier. This covers all of those organizations under section 170BIA2 of the IRS code, including K-12 and post-secondary institutions, such as tribal colleges and universities, TCUs, Native American serving non-tribal institutions, and other institutions, but these other institutions must have a history and experience in serving Native farmers and ranchers. We have further recommendations regarding FERTEP involvement, the Federally Recognized Tribes Extension Program. We require that you have those agents involved if they are present at your university in your project. Now we'll talk about CDFIs, or Community Development Financial Institutions. Their general focus is a little bit different from the others because of their different goals and work. It's loan capital, re-granting capital, and technical assistance or business assistance. The special focus areas for CDFIs are beginning farmer and rancher, climate resilience, conservation and disaster assistance, and communal land acquisition. The available pool for CDFIs is $5 million. It's a little bit different. There are no published maximums or minimums. We just ask that you don't request the entire pool of $5 million. And now we will talk about tribes and their instrumentalities. So the general focus is the same for as for 501c3s and educational organizations, business assistance, agricultural education, technical support, and advocacy services. And then special focus areas are agriculture infrastructure, beginning farmer and rancher, climate resilience and conservation, conservation and disaster assistance, and communal land acquisition. The pool for tribes is $2 million this year, and the minimum request for general focus is $150,000, and the maximum request is $200,000.
We'll do a special slide here on instrumentalities. Every tribe is unique, and both state and federally recognized tribes are eligible entities, and each one of those have their own instrumentalities that vary greatly, from Section 17 corporations to tribal farms or departments within tribes. It is up to the applicant to provide to us the governing documents that would provide to us the information so that we know that you're an eligible entity. If you are an instrumentality of a tribe applying on behalf of the tribe, then we need to know that the tribes, that you are a formal instrumentality. So you need to provide us that documentation. Again, I'll use Section 17 as an example. If you are a Section 17, then you need to provide us that information. Sometimes that includes resolutions or charter documentation. The other thing that we must have when we're including instrumentalities is to know that the instrumentality has the authority to apply for our funding on behalf of the tribe. We've had instances in the past where an instrumentality has applied without the consent of the tribe, and then we had issues of finalizing the grant agreement. So make sure that the instrumentality is communicating with the tribe, that we have some form of documentation on eligibility, but also that the tribe has agreed to allow the instrumentality to apply. So instrumentalities of tribes, state or federally recognized, again, can mean any number of things. And tribal governments have the latitude to determine which entities are instrumentalities of their governments. And NAAF only needs the proper documentation of that status. If an organization wishes to be considered as an instrumentality of a state government, the organization must secure and submit an authorizing document from their tribal government to that specific effect. We are going to talk later about sovereign immunity waivers in the next slides, but also when we're talking about instrumentalities and their authority to apply on behalf of their tribal governments, we only need enough information that we know that you have permission to apply. If your tribal government only meets a few times a year, or if they only allow votes of that nature to come up at certain types of meetings and maybe a general session where it's open to the full tribe, let us know that and we can still allow you to apply. But again, our contact information is going to be at the end of this slide, and our email that you would contact is grants@NativeAmericanAgricultureFund.org, where you can ask us those types of information. There's instances where we'll allow you to continue with your application if you supply us enough information that we know that the application is going to be approved, or that the tribe knows that the application is going to eventually need some type of resolution from the tribal government. But again, any questions, you can email us, you can call us, and the sooner the better. We ask that all questions of this nature throughout the application be asked at least 1 week prior to our application closing date. And we say that because we always have a number of applicants that come to us on the last day, in the 11th hour before we need to click submit, and we do not have the capacity. We have a small team at NAAF to answer all of those questions in a matter of hours. So the sooner you ask the questions, the better. Other information, as I stated earlier, important reminders for tribes that tribes are required to provide limited waivers of sovereign immunity. And they are required. This was required by our trust agreement, and there are no exceptions. The other important reminder for tribes is related to industrial hemp. Tribes are the only entity that are allowed to apply for feasibility and market studies only in our RFA. And that's because tribal governments are the entities that are eligible to apply for this funding through the federal government. And we need to make sure that the work that we are funding in this space currently is in compliance with all of those tribal, state, and federal laws. As hemp and the hemp industry and rulemaking continues to progress, NAAF will look at, and our board will determine other eligible entities if they can apply for this type of funding in the future, or if our funding will turn into eventually shovel to the ground or other types of funding related to hemp. But currently it's only for feasibility and market studies only. Again, if you have questions on hemp, or the limited waiver of sovereign immunity, please contact us, and the sooner the better. We have a video on our website on limited waivers of sovereign immunity within the RFA application process. We also have model language related to sovereign immunity waivers. And please note that this is a limited waiver of sovereign immunity. So if your application is only for $50,000, say it's a youth application, and that youth application is only for 12 months, then the limited waiver of sovereign immunity is limited to that amount of money and the term of that grant. We have had a number of tribes that have applied for our funding and successfully provided limited waivers of sovereign immunity. We can walk you through this process. We can also engage with your tribe's law offices, whether they're in-house or outside general counsel, and communicate with the tribal government itself as we move through this process. Note that the final limited waiver of immunity will not be due until awards have been made and grant agreements are in the process. Generally, this allows you upwards of 3 months to prepare for the limited waiver of sovereign immunity. You can let your tribal government know now that eventually you will need a limited waiver of immunity. Again, you can look at our model language. You can review our video, and we can, for every tribe, knowing that every tribe is unique, we can adapt. We can also adapt as we move forward through the grant agreement process to make sure that we're respecting each tribe and tribe's sovereign immunity. Our process, unfortunately, requires a sovereign immunity waiver. We say unfortunately because we know that this is something that is very crucial to tribes. We want to make sure that we're respecting tribal governing authority, but it is part of our trust agreement. Therefore, we have to include it. But know that it has been done before, and we do have example language within our application process. So please reach out to us if you have any questions on limited waivers of sovereign immunity.
As I mentioned earlier, the special focus areas do have different minimum and maximum requests for each focus. So I'll go through in detail on these, and this is also included in our RFA in the application. So when you're going through, if you decide to apply for a special focus, please do pay attention to these different minimum and maximum request amounts. For agriculture infrastructure, only tribes are eligible to apply for this focus area, and the minimum request is $75,000 and the maximum request is $100,000. For beginning farmer and rancher, any eligible entity can apply for this funding. The minimum request is $50,000 and the maximum is $100,000. For climate resilience, conservation, and disaster assistance, any eligible entity can apply. The minimum is $50,000 and the maximum is $125,000. And lastly, for communal land acquisition, only TCUs or tribal colleges and universities, tribes themselves, or CDFIs, community development financial institutions, may apply for this funding. The minimum request is $100,000 and the maximum is $125,000.
A note to the special focus areas is that our general funding, which we talked about the max and minimum for those applications, this is embedded in that. This complements that part of our application process. So this is in addition to the funding that you could receive for those sections, you can add this. So for instance, if you are a CDFI and you're going after 200,000, you can come back in here and go after another eligible area that you're eligible for, say beginner farmer and rancher, or the communal land acquisition, and go after an additional $125,000. This, for some entities, tribes in particular, that are eligible for a majority of these areas, you could move from having a project that is 50,000 towards upwards of 300,000 or more. So know that we also ask that you do not combine these applications, the general and the special emphasis areas, in a manner that they cannot exist separately or without us funding both of them. And that's to say, because sometimes in the review process when all the applications come in. Your targeted project is really good, but the special emphasis area that you're applying for might need a little bit of work. And so if you write the application in a manner where they can't exist outside of one another, then your targeted might not get approved. So make sure that even though the work that you're applying for and targeted, that this special emphasis can complement that, but also that your special emphasis project might be able to exist on its own, because you can get one or the other, or you can get both. So our youth programming, again, our youth application is a separate application, and it has a separate closing date. All entities that we talked about prior are eligible to apply for the youth grant. This has its own process where if you've applied in the past, you can use a special tool that we have within our application process called Copy Process, and you can move all information from your last year's application to this year. If you have not yet applied, know that it's very similar to the same questions that we asked in our general application, but this is a smaller pool. There is available $1 million for our youth applications this year, and the caps and bases are between $20,000 and $40,000, and these are due by May 18th. We close our youth application process early because in earlier rounds of funding, we heard from educators and educational institutions that it would have been better for them to know exactly what they were going to be walking into towards the summer or the fall. So, and some of our school boards don't meet during the summer, and some educational educators are not available during the summer. So we close this one early so that we can notify it in June and allow, we shoot for June and August so that we can allow those eligible entities the summer, and they can get ready and prepare for their applications and project deliverables to begin in early fall. But note that this does end earlier. So if you are working on both a youth application and a general, we encourage you to finish your youth right away so that you meet that deadline. But again, a lot of the application questions are the same. So some of your documentation you can use in both applications, and it should speed up your process. So our application criteria, we get this question a lot in our RFA. In our RFA, we have a table of contents on our website where we ask all of these questions. So you can go directly to the specific page where you can find this information for each eligible entity type. But again, because this case was originally based on violations of access to credit and credit servicing, the largest component are the weighted, largest weight that we provide in our applications, kind of bonus points, are the impact on access to capital. So if your project is going to, and all of them have to include it, but if you check that box, then you are eligible for that 25% weight. Other areas that we provide this information are the weighted scoring is in proposed results and outcomes, farmer and rancher demand, team organizational capacity and collaborators, evaluation weight, and innovation and replicability. So proposed results and outcomes is another 25%. Farmer and rancher demand is 20%. Team organizational capacity and collaborators is 10%. Overall evaluation is 10%. And innovation and replicability is an additional 10%. If you have questions on the weighting score or the process itself, again, you can contact us on our email, grants@nativeamericanagriculturefund.org, or through our phone number. But note that our process includes 3 parts. We have an initial gleaning on eligibility, and it is the responsibility of each applicant to provide us enough information that we know that you are an eligible entity. It is also the burden of our applicant to provide to us information that we know that your eligible entity is in good standing. And an example is our 501c3s. If we do a third-party glean on our 501c3s and some of our other entities, looking at your tax information, if we see that you are not in good standing with the IRS or Treasury, then your application will not be reviewed. So we encourage you to look at that information prior to submitting your application. If you have questions or you want to make a comment on why maybe it says you're not in good standing at that moment, that you are currently in the process of negotiating something that happened in prior years with the IRS or Treasury, or the tribal government itself, then please let us know ahead of time and we can flag that. But otherwise, that will make it to where we don't even get to look at your application in this first gleaning process. The second process is that we have internal and external evaluators. We go through an evaluation process for both the youth and general grant. We have scoring that takes place. And then we have deliberations where we discuss each application and the different entities that we want to recommend that ultimately our board makes this final determination. Currently, we have 14 board members. You can find the information on who our board members are on our website. But our overall process is very in-depth and it continues to improve every year. And included in that is that if you do not get funded in this funding cycle, we will meet with you and have a specific phone call where we will talk about areas you can strengthen your application in the following year. We have had a number of applicants who have been denied in previous years, took that information and really implemented it in the following year, and were then funded that second or sometimes third time. We do try to, as we go through this process, make sure that we're funding various types of projects, that we're meeting the needs of Indian country agriculture, and that we are making sure that we're trying to reach all different parts of Indian country, from one coast to the other. So again, if you have any questions, please visit our website. So the application review, and that is outcome results-based projects, progress reporting and compliance, grantee convening, a cover letter, a resume of key personnel, budget and budget narrative, confidentiality and conflict of interest, and unsuccessful applicants. Our outcomes and results-based projects, a lot of our projects have projects that they're going to do in 12, 18, or 24 months. We know that COVID is affecting a lot of communities and still continues to affect communities. So we ask in the application if you can talk about that. Well, COVID potentially impact your ability to make sure that your outcomes and results can be done within 12, 18, or 24 months. And if you explain that in the application process, it helps us as we look through all the applications that are applying and what we can accomplish in that given time period. We have applications from 2019 that we're still trying to wrap up because entire communities have been shut down. A lot of our first applicants were based on community engagement, community involvement, and much of that has been put on hold for multiple years now. So again, think about that when you're in your application, and as we're reviewing the applications, that's what we're looking at too. We will not hold it against you if you're dealing with COVID or you have a community that's very vulnerable to COVID or COVID issues such as supply chain. We know that some of our very remote communities are impacted the most. If in the past you've had issues as a successful applicant of NAAF with reporting and compliance, that's taken into account as we review your application in the following year. So know that if you're coming in as a new applicant, that's something we're going to look at. Now that we have a record of previous applicants and processes, it is going to be something that we look at. Our compliance team does an update on former applicants. Did you turn in your reporting on time? And if you were impacted and your community was impacted by various issues related to COVID, did you let us know that? We are a private entity. We're not the federal government. We don't want this to be a real drawn out process that is a burden to you or your community, but we do need for you to communicate. And sometimes that is one sentence and it says, you know, your tribe is shut down because of COVID, period. That gives us enough notice, but we need that communication to take place. And again, because that does, during the application review process, that does come up. We do have a grantee convening each year. This coming year, we'll have our first in-person grantee convening. In each application, we ask you to reserve enough money to attend for one person in your project to be able to attend that grantee convening. And again, we haven't been able to meet because of COVID, and we've allowed our former grantees to reallocate that funding into other areas of their application. But we intend to start having those grantee convenings in person. We're really excited and we look forward to meeting all of our grantees. We ask that you have cover letters, your cover letters and other aspects of your application. Some of it are required and some of them are optional, but it just gives us more information. It's an opportunity for you to further explain to us who you are and what you want to accomplish, or who you're working with to accomplish those goals. Make sure that all those attachments, they are in PDF and they are included. The resume of your key personnel. So one of the questions that we get in our application is that we are not required. We are not a tribal government. We are not IHS. We're not BIA. We cannot require Native preference. It wasn't included in the original trust agreement. We have eligible entities that are the foremost experts in what they do. Maybe it's in a certain type of crop or commodity. When the trust was being established, those entities that were key decision makers and who would be eligible determined that in some instances it might not be a Native-led entity that would be able to provide the most service to those communities. The requirement that NAAF has and our trust agreement has is that it serves a Native community, whether it's being conducted by a Native or non-Native is not a requirement, but we do encourage Native preference to the extent that we can in that in your application. If you are engaging consultants, if you're working with an educational institution, we want to know and we want to see that you're engaged in the community, you have community buy-in, that you have tribal participation. And so those are things we look at when we look at your resume and key personnel, and then we look at your budget to know that if you're engaging in maybe an environmental consultant, that environmental consultant is tribal. If you're not using a tribal consultant, then explaining to us that person that you're hiring has been working with tribes for a number of years, that they focus exclusively in working with tribes. Those are the types of things that we're going to look at in depth in each application. But again, we know that some of our entities are not going to be tribally led, are 100% tribally operated. We just ask that you explain that in your application, and some of the areas that we glean that information is in your cover letters, in your resume, and your budget and budget narrative. We hold confidentiality and conflict of interest in very high regard at NAAF, and we implement that within our staff, but also within our board members and any external evaluators that come in to review these applications. We have a process of gleaning that for conflicts of interest, but in particular confidentiality. We use a third grant making application software system, and that software system that we use is a company that has thousands of other similar entities, nonprofits, educational institutions that use their software system. They have incredible layers of confidentiality and security. So know that that is something that we hold in high regard, and any of the information that you provide to us, it is held in that space. There are some tools that this software system allows for you to utilize, and in particular, it's really perfect for COVID, as many of our communities are still shut down, or we've moved remote, your communities moved remote. We have a tool called that collaborator that will allow you to invite others to be part of your application process, but you have the authority to allow them the level of engagement that they'll have in your application. So some of it is edit, they can view, they can edit, or they can submit. If you allow someone to submit, then they have the authority to review all parts of your application, including your budget information. So know that when you're in the application process. We have more on that later in this website as we move through how to apply in Foundit. And again, unsuccessful applicants will have the opportunity to engage with us one-on-one to find out how they can improve their application in our next funding cycle. Notes on the budget. NAAF's indirect limit is 15%, and there are no exceptions. And that was part of NAAF's trust agreement. There are some educational institutions that have made exceptions that have never made that exception in the past, but they have done that for NAAF's application process. Same with tribal governments. So understand that that is a hard 15%. If you have questions on what indirect is and how you can maneuver that within your application, you can reach out to us. Applicants must follow the budget guidelines and use our required template. The first year we allowed everyone to do their own template, and it was way too time consuming for our reviewers to get through this process and our trustees to go in. Some of them were 2 pages, some of them were almost 100 pages. So understand that we have a template, and that template is designed to make this easy for you and also for our staff. So use the budget, the required budget template. And again, this will be the same template that we hope to use in success in other years. We've really made sure, and we evaluate all of our application and every part of our application. Every year we went through and we made our budget template even easier this year. So use that template. If you don't, that could kick your application out from getting approved. Also, applicants must abide by the requests for minimum and maximum as listed in each category. So again, for CDFIs, we say, please don't ask for the full 5 million. And if you do, that could affect your application in its review and our ability to review this, because as we're reviewing the minimums and maximums, we want to make sure that we, as much as possible, are funding your application at 100%. So that you know exactly what what you have provided to us and what you're going to get. In our first funding cycle, we did not have a minimum. We didn't have bases and caps in our applications, and it made for a really long process of getting through grant agreements because we had to do a lot of budget modifications. Somebody came in and said, "I want 300,000," and after we went through and picked all of the successful applicants, we said, "Actually, we only have 85,000," and it meant that it could impact their whole project. And so this what we have right now, the process that we have to have a pool, a base, and a cap is meant to make your job easier, but also to make the process of getting our grant agreements out the door easier for our staff and improve the amount of time it takes for you to get that money into your account and start working within your communities. Critical deadlines are that our NAAF youth funding does close early. So be prepared to get that application in first if you're applying for both the youth and the general. The youth closes on May 18th, 2022 at 11:59 p.m. Central. Our applications have always been in Central Time. So be prepared to accommodate whatever time zone you're in to meet that Central Time deadline. And again, we encourage you to turn it in early because we have had applicants that they're 1 minute late and this system shuts off and we do not provide extensions. If it is, we have had people that have come to us and said that it was our software system. We make sure that our software system that we use knows when our deadline is closing, when we're going to have heavy traffic. The same with our website. And in the system that we use, it's called Foundit. Everything is timestamped. We can go in there and we can see how much of your application was done, who was in there, how long they were in there. So we've had applicants that said, oh, I missed the deadline by 1 minute, can I turn it in tomorrow? But then we go in and we say they didn't even have their uploads ready. They only had 20% of the application process complete. So even if they missed it by 1 minute, they wouldn't have made it. And so just know that we very, very, very rarely can make an exception on the deadline. So if you're in there and you're having issues, you can let us know ahead of time. We try to have staff all the way to 11:59 Central available to you, but there's hundreds of people that are applying on that last day. The NAAF 2022 General RFA closes on June 1st, and that is June 1st, 2022 at 11:59 Central. And again, the reminder, there is no opportunity to edit the application after the deadline. So do your best. And another note of caution, if you are allowing other people to be part of your application process, make sure that you know who's going to submit. Unfortunately, we had an applicant last year who had around 4 people that were in the system. They all thought somebody else had clicked submit, and ultimately nobody clicked submit. So make sure that you know who your point of contact is, who is going to click submit, so that your application makes it in on our deadline. So now we'll start into the process of what does it look like when you're applying in our grant software system through Foundant. And this is an online application. You click the portal to get to this page that you see right now from our website. So returning applicants, you can log on using your existing credentials. New applicants, you will click the Create New Account button. Notice on the welcome page to this side that we have some links for you, so that if you are unsure if you're an eligible entity, or if you are not the correct person that would get in here, maybe you're not the grant maker for your tribe, grant writer for your tribe, or you're not the grant writer for your educational institution, but you're just looking to see what this will entail, then we encourage you to go and click the PDF version of what the application will look like instead of getting in here. Because if you get in here, we're going to ask you for your own personal information. Then we're going to ask you for your institutional information. And if you're not that person, then it turns into multiple applications for the same tribe. And it also kind of gums up our system. And it means that our numbers are skewed, because it looks like we had a bunch of people who didn't make it through the process. And then our trustees come to us and say, well, how come 68 people didn't make it through the grant process? Well, that's because a lot of people, and I'm guilty, I do this too, whenever I see funding out there, I want to see what it's about and what I'm going to have to do to get that funding. I'll go into the application process. So we caution you, please don't. That's what you can find right here on these links, and you can find them on our website, is the PDF versions of what this application will entail. And if you are a new user and you go through this create your account process, the email that you use will then be your login information. So please make sure that you are the correct person that needs to be in here, but also make sure that you're going to have access to that email moving forward, because that's going to be your username. The other thing is if you can't remember your password after you've been in the system, there you can do the forgot password, and you don't necessarily need us for that, but we can help you through that. But again, it's a pretty simple process. You do the forgot password, and you'll get a link to your email that you provided as your initial email address and username. We also ask that if you're a tribe or any other eligible entity, that only one person is getting in here. Each application is its own username, its own project. We do have sometimes where different departments of tribes, or maybe a tribal colleges or CDFI are applying. Eligible entities are different, but if you are a tribe, you have one application, and that's it. You can't have multiple applications for the same tribe for various departments of the tribe. So think about that across our eligible entity types. Think about that within your eligible entity. Who's going to apply? What's the project going to look like? You can apply on behalf of other departments within your tribe within the application process, but it's one application. Once you get in and you've created your username, this is what your dashboard will look like. And it won't say sandbox in the background. This is just an example of what a dashboard looks like, but you'll see your applicant information that will have your address, your point of contact, your organization's information, contact history. But once you get in there, you will see the ability to apply for our youth RRFA. We also have some other things. We use this software system for employee hiring. We use it for requests for proposals. But note that you will only be applying for, or you'll be applying for the grant process. So make sure that when you see that as an opportunity to apply, you're applying for the 2022 grant process, either youth or general. The other thing that you'll find is if you have already been an applicant within NAAF, you'll see your current active requests. You can also see your historical requests. And again, there's a tool that you can use called Copy Process that will copy over your former application and all the information from your prior applications into this new application. So again, there's the apply button and you'll see 2022 requests for general or youth. Make sure that those are the things you're applying to. We do have a couple positions that we have one that's live right now. We have another one that will be live during this grant application process. So if you want to apply to be an employee, that's great. But this particular RFA, it will state specifically 2022 general, and that's what you'll click to apply to. And again, both the youth and the general you need to apply for separately. So you will go through the process of clicking apply to the general or the youth. Again, youth closes early, so try to get the application in sooner. So once you're in the application, you will see after you click the entity type that you are, and then the types of additional funding that you want to apply for, that's the information that you'll see. If you are a tribe, you won't see the specific questions for a CDFI. So know that as you're moving through the process, it relates to the eligible entity type that you are applying as. Our application process, it looks really big and lengthy, but a lot of this is demographic information that we're asking you. We're trying to glean information on the type of project that you're going to pursue, the amount of farmers and ranchers that you're going to serve. So know that even though it looks lengthy, the process you can get through it relatively quickly. And I'm going to use an example. One year we had an applicant who went on maternity leave during our 2-month open period, came back, did not realize that our grant application was open. I think it was around 1:30 in the afternoon. She sent us a message asking for an extension. Unfortunately, we don't provide those, but she was still able to get her entire application in from the afternoon, 1:30 in the afternoon before 11:59 that night. So it can be done, but we encourage you to try to get it done ahead of time. The sooner, the better. So again, the important dates related to this RFA and to the application itself, save these dates. This is a pre-recorded webinar, but at the end of each webinar, we have really engaging Q&A where you can ask us specific questions about your application or the process itself. So those dates include Thursday, April 14th from 2 to 4, which is the first webinar, the one we're recording today. Thursday, April 21st from 2 to 4 p.m. and again, Central Time for the youth RFA if you plan on applying for the youth. Thursday, April 28th from 2 to 4 p.m. Central. Thursday, May 12th from 2 to 4 Central, and Thursday, May 26th from 2 p.m. Central. And note that Thursday, May 26th, our last RFA webinar, is mostly Q&A. We really limit the amount of background information. This webinar is also recorded. You can access it on our website, but make sure if you have any questions, that's your last opportunity to engage with us and our staff and ask those questions in real time, and that is on May 26th from 2 to 4 p.m. If you need to contact us, our email address is grants, GRANTS at nativeamericanagriculturefund.org. You have to spell out the whole thing. It's a really long email address, but again, it's pretty easy to remember because it's our full name. Our phone number and where you can leave a voicemail and we will get back to you in a timely manner is 479-445-6226. And if you have any media questions, you can contact media at nativeamericanagriculturefund.org. Again, MEDIA at nativeamericanagriculturefund.org. We monitor our inbox. We also monitor our phone. And we have a special process that we engage in during all of our open grant period, where we document when the phone call comes in, what the question is, and who within our staff is going to answer that question. Some of these are relatively easy. Maybe you forgot your password from last year and you need assistance getting back into the software system. Then that's an easy answer. But some of them, especially those related to tribal sovereign immunity waivers, those can take longer. But we document when the question comes in, who's going to handle it, and then their responsive time. And generally, we answer all of our questions within 28 to 48 hours. If you are not having a response, that email at grants is also documented and timestamped, and again, very responsive. We have multiple people that monitor these inboxes every day during our open grant process. So thank you for your interest in our grant process. Understand that each year for the foreseeable future, we have a timeline. We do not exist after 2038, and we will have a wind down period prior to that, but we envision that we will be doing grant making for at least the next 12 years. We've already provided over $72 million in funding, and this funding cycle includes $12 million. And we are so excited for your application, to hear what you want to do within your community, and know that the base of our case is a result of the Keep Siegel v. Vilsack litigation. We do have some of that background information on the case within our website, but also you can Google it to find out more about where we came from and the funding that we have to utilize over our 20-year period. And understand that we have to abide by our cypre provisions in our grant agreement, which again is related to access to credit and credit servicing and supporting Native American farmers and ranchers. And Native American farmers and ranchers is very broadly defined. It includes fisher women and men. It also includes forestry and grasslands. Think about things that you're eligible to apply for within the Department of Agriculture, and those generally are eligible projects that we can fund within NAAF. We are a private entity, and we are not here to replace the federal government. So if your application is something that you can receive within the Department of Agriculture, note that that will be noted in our application process, and you likely won't get funded, because we will then send you to the department, the agency, office, or mission area that conducts that. We want to make sure that the federal government, in their trust and fiduciary obligation, is continuing to serve our communities. But if your project is a gap fill, maybe USDA, you're not eligible for USDA funding, you can still apply for our funds. We did include in this year a couple additional special emphasis areas that also have programs within the Department of Agriculture, and that's beginning and farm and ranch special emphasis areas. We also have special emphasis for conservation practices, but I encourage you to go to the website and understand where those projects are and within the federal government, and what you could apply for, and how your project's going to be different, or why your project's needed. And perhaps it's that you are applying for our funding so that you can leverage and apply for federal funding, which is something that other eligible entities have done in the past. Our funding being private can be used in that manner, and same with the communal land. Communal land special emphasis in this year's application, it might not seem like a lot of money, that cap in that funding special emphasis area. But if you're looking at applying for a federal secured or guaranteed loan, you generally only need a small percentage down. And the amount of money that you can get from NAAF in the communal land funding area should be enough to get you a pretty significant piece of property, or for you to consolidate other issues within the land holding that you currently have. But again, NAAF is a private entity birthed out of the Keep Eagle v. Vilsack. So note that a lot of the work that we do and what we focus on is to support the initial harms of the original claimants and make sure that we're trying to solve those harms and make sure that they don't happen in the future. But it also means that we're limited on what the extent of work that we can do in Indian country. This project, unfortunately, was not based on traditional harms, traditional food practice harms. We include that and we do encourage that in our applications. And a lot of our youth applications include traditional foods and language within their application. But ultimately, the claimants that filed this class action were based in production agriculture. And that therefore is what we fund at NAAF. So again, thank you for your interest in your application.
Great, thank you so much. We're going to move into our question and answer section here. So Graham, we'll go ahead and get started with some of the first questions that came through.
Okay.
One question is, can tribal agricultural cooperatives registered as LLC apply through a 501c3 sponsor?
So organizations that are seeking nonprofit status but have not yet received a favorable determination may apply through a fiscal sponsor. If you are an LLC, a tribal ag co-op, you may consider discussing the application with the tribe and applying as a tribal instrumentality if you do not have a 501c3 favorable determination or are not applying for one.
Thank you, Graham. Do nonprofit organizations applying through a 501c3 sponsor need to have a formal MOU in place?
So NAAF respects the right for fiscal sponsors and sponsored organizations to structure their relationship in a manner that makes sense for them, so long as it meets the expectation of the fiscal sponsor exercising discretion and control over the granted funds. NAAF will not view or review or approve an applicant and fiscal sponsor agreement or contract.
Thank you, Graham. And just as a reminder, you can submit your questions as we're going through this, and we're going to do our best to answer all questions here live. I do see a couple of questions and notes here about sharing notes, and that's great. We'd love to be able to also share and contribute if you need access to the PowerPoint presentation. Also, this as a reminder, this webinar is recorded, so we will make sure it is posted to our 2022 RFA webpage. At the bottom, you can see all the webinar recordings, so you can reference those as a later date. I recommend looking at those. We have different questions every webinar that come through, so if you have some that maybe other people have asked, that might be good to learn from as well. Another question, it says, it looks like maybe this is a found-it specific question. Does the copy feature apply to the general application as well if you've applied in the past? And I think this is referencing our grant application software.
Yes, it does. So the copy process feature can be used for both general and youth.
Perfect. Okay. And again, if you have any technical questions as you're going through the Found It system, a great place to start. We have a point of contact here. I'm actually going to go ahead and share my screen to make sure you have that. We have both an email address and a phone number. So that way, again, we have members of our team going through that and monitoring. So if you need to talk to someone on the phone, you're more than welcome. So I'm going to put that up on the screen as we go through the questions here. Great. Okay. Another question, Graham. If an instrument of the tribe applies with a resolution from the tribal government, will the award be made directly to the instrument, or would it be awarded to the tribal government and the instrument becomes a subrecipient?
It would be made to the instrumentality directly, not to the tribe.
Great, thank you for the clarification. One question that came through was if NAAF has created an evaluation template that tribes or nonprofits can utilize to capture beneficial results and outcomes.
So NAAF does not have a template available to capture results and outcomes currently, but we do monitor and hold on to these questions for future consideration.
Thank you, Graham. Do re-grants, business planning workshops, and grant writing workshops for producers help improve weight of access to capital? For example, this person asking a question says that their tribe does not offer ag loans at this time.
Yes, it does. So re-grants, business planning workshops, grant writing workshops, those do count as examples of improving access to capital. I do recommend that anyone interested in this look at page 8 of our RFA for a more concrete definition of NAAF's definition of access to capital. There's also a link to a video on there that explains a lot of this stuff. And I also recommend checking out page 22 of the RFA for more information on how these items are evaluated.
Great, thank you, Graham. And what we'll try to do here, maybe have one of our members of our team try to drop a link to that question document, but it is also housed on our website. So if you're going to that webpage, you can access that link there. Another question, can 501c3s apply for both general and youth grants?
Yes, so any eligible entity, be it a 501c3, an educational organization, a CDFI, or a tribe or tribal instrumentality can apply for both youth and general grants freely.
Great. Is there a difference between applying as a state recognized tribe versus a 501c3 of the tribe?
So if you are applying as a tribe, then you'd be applying through the tribal route. And if you're applying as a 501c3, then you'd be going through the 501c3 route. And so they do have some slight differences in what special emphasis projects they can interact with. So for example, applying through the tribal route allows you access to do some things with hemp that 501c3s are not able to do.
Thank you, Graham. We have a question here. If it's possible to contextualize NAAF's definition of beginning ranchers and farmers, especially for those indigenous tribes who have a historic and cultural tie to ranching and farming. And is this something taught as soon as children are old enough to walk?
Yes, so NAAF defines beginning farmer and ranchers as individuals of any age that are entering the ag industry for the first time. And so I'm going to emphasize there the ag industry. So the claimants and mission of NAAF is focused in some ways around production agriculture. And so I would say that that's something to keep in mind when applying for the beginning farmer and ranchers category. It's not specific to age. If you are interested in doing programming that is focused on youth specifically, to apply for the youth grant funds.
Thank you, Graham. Could you clarify what is meant by not sharing personal identifying information in the grant? Is it okay to name organizations and community collaborators by name and tribe?
Yes, so you may name organizations and collaborators that you're planning on working with, but what we do not want is to mention specific individuals who will benefit from receiving the grant. So for example, if you said in your application, we want $50,000, $10,000 will go to Mike Williams, $10,000 will go to John Doe, etc. Then you're giving too much information. You're giving us you're letting us know individuals who will benefit from the grant, which is, according to our trust agreement, we're not allowed to fund if we know those individuals are benefiting specifically.
Thank you for that clarification. Do 501c3 organizations have to be a tribal instrumentality? Are 501c3 organizations serving different individual Native American ranchers and farmers in their ancestral regions eligible, or would it require the 501c3 to be a tribal instrumentality of the 12 different nations and pueblos in which the organization serves?
So it's fairly simple for 501c3s. To be a 501c3 and apply as one, you simply need to have favorable determination of 501c3 nonprofit status from the IRS. It doesn't have to be connected to the tribe or disconnected from the tribe.
Great. Is there a point of contact to reach out to you about prior applications and ways in which their organization can improve for this year?
So for that, I recommend reaching out to, this is an email I'm about to give you, grants@NativeAmericanAgricultureFund.org to further discuss that. Generally, with that feedback on prior applications, we do that pretty soon after our application process ends. And so I'd recommend reaching out to the grants@NativeAmericanAgricultureFund.org email to discuss that further.
Thank you. And we promise that there is actually a person who monitors that inbox. I know sometimes there's hesitation to send emails to general inbox names, but we do have someone looking at that every single day. So they will get back to you. And there's also a phone number. So if you prefer to contact someone by reaching out to them via phone, that phone number is 479-445-6226. A couple of other questions that came through. Will there be an area in the general grant to apply for the special focus area? I believe this is referring to me where they can find that and found it.
Yes. So as you go throughout your grant, general is specific to its general and youth. And so within that general is where you will find those special focus areas. And as you go through the application, you'll be able to see which areas you want to apply for, and that's how you'll find those special focus areas.
Great. This one is maybe a more specific question, and we may need to follow up directly, but I'll just ask it generally. So there's a Native-led group that this person is a part of that has an IRS application in and are currently a project sponsored by an existing nonprofit. They have a special focus on sharing knowledge on farming, traditional native plant foods, and a strong ability and belief in turning these foods into production-based products. Although so far they've been making sure they are available to elders and youth in culture connection projects. Do they need experience as a project or nonprofit with selling food goods?
So in terms, it really depends on what your project is about. If your project really speaks to your organization's strengths, then I would recommend leaning onto those strengths. And if it's a project focused on something that you are approaching for the first time, we definitely recommend bringing on and partnering with other more experienced organizations and leveraging their experience to use as substantiation for your project.
When are projects estimated to be awarded?
So what I can say on that is that our previous rounds of general and youth projects started on November 1st.
Thank you. All right. I think we are getting most of our questions answered here. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Let's see. Feel free to submit your questions here. I think we've maybe been able to answer all of them. Just as a reminder, this will be recorded, posted to the website. We'll try to get that done here within the next couple of hours. So if you want to check back in the morning, that will for sure be there. And any questions can be directed to the grants at NativeAmericanAgricultureFund.org. If you've asked a question and I've said that we'll follow up directly, we'll be sure to do that as soon as possible. But unless there are any other questions that are coming through, we appreciate all of you for joining us today and look forward to maybe joining next week if you have additional questions as you go through As you go through your application, join us for our next webinar. As mentioned in the recording, we'll have that really dedicated to some live questions and answers, and we'll have our team available to you. Thank you all so much for joining. Have a wonderful day.